It's my pleasure to introduce Jill Burstein, who told me that she got a PhD from City University in New York, and she is a researcher at the Educational Testing Service, and she's going to talk on the commercial development of writing evaluation capabilities. And,
that's it. Okay.
Welcome.
Okay. So I'm sorry we're starting late, but we had some technical difficulties, and we still have some technical difficulties. I was going to show you a demo, but I don't have a connection. So I have screens, and I'll talk about it and use your imagination. Okay, so I come from Educational Testing Service. This is an assessment company. They do standardized testing. So I want to talk a bit about assessment in the context of my work, because I always, especially if I'm coming to talk to students, I try to make a really important point that we're working in NLP, but when you work, whatever industry you're working in, you have to understand that industry, especially if you want to make significant progress. So what does writing skill development mean for educators? So teachers, I'm basically talking about teachers, policymakers who work at the state level. And basically what they want for writing is they want, from kindergarten to 12th grade, they want them to basically master basic writing skills. They want them to be able to, basic writing skills means grammar, spelling, punctuation. They want them to be able to perfect the 5-paragraph essay, which many people will argue we don't teach the 5-paragraph essay, but if anybody has kids or will have kids in the school system, they will be learning the 5-paragraph essay.
what's a 5-paragraph essay? I mean, essay
yeah. It's an introductory paragraph that usually has some background information, a thesis statement, 3 main points with supporting evidence, and a conclusion. That's how we learn to write essays. That's how we start. Okay, we don't necessarily end there, and that's it, but that's sort of how the developing writer starts. And they also want them to be able to write across genres, across disciplines. So it's not just about answering some general essay question, but if I have a question in social studies or something in science or history, I need to be able to write in that context. And those of you who are not from or weren't educated in this country, this may not apply, but here, that's how it works right now. And that's how it's worked for quite a while. Anyway, so they have a vision, and they have many ways of evaluating how well this vision is being implemented. So for instance, there's lots of high-stakes testing for admissions, for placement in schools and undergraduate and private schools, wherever. There's a lot of different kinds of standardized high-stakes testing. There's also what we call no or low-stakes testing. What that means is it doesn't affect the candidate individually. It doesn't have an impact directly on a single person, but for instance, so the statewide or national assessments will tell a state how well they're doing. The national assessments will tell the nation how well they're doing, the nation's report card, this kind of stuff. And then also low stakes in the classroom, so classroom instruction for writing, and that's the demo that I would have shown you. Our system is exactly that. So let's talk about what an essay looks like, because whenever I give talks, everybody has their own idea of what an essay is. And when I talk about essays, I'm talking about typically timed assessments, so they're not literary essays. I have yet to find an essay that has any kind of creativity or irony. They're trying to get their point across in 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes. For a lot of the data that we get now is instructional data, and we're not sure. When I say instructional data, it's data that's been collected in the classroom. So when students are using our system and they're submitting essays, we collect those essays. We don't necessarily know how long the student had to write that essay. So it's possible that they would be longer than the typical standardized timed assessment, or they may be a little bit more refined because they've had time to do revisions. But they're basically the same. We don't score creative writing. So let's just clear that up right now, because someone always asks that question. This is what this is what an essay looks like. This is a real essay. I may have cut out a paragraph just to fit it on the screen, but this is more or less the kind of writing that we get. This was like 10th, 11th grade. And And it's just a 10th, 11th grade essay that you might find typically. So it's pretty boring, but it's not too bad in terms of its grammar and spelling and stuff. It's not a nightmare, okay? But that's sort of what, it's not a long R and yeah. I'll show you worse, okay. Then there's these. This is an essay. I went, like, when I did this invited talk at NACL, I went looking for entertainment. And so this was an essay I found. We don't get a lot of these, but they do come up.
What was the topic?
The topic, I don't even know what they were answering. I was just looking through. No, I don't think there was a topic. I don't know. I don't know what the topic was. But it was an essay that I pulled out of a corpus. And it's really well written, notice. It is. It's an essay about someone being stupid, but there's no spelling, there's no grammar. It's very clear what they're trying to say. As opposed to, wait.
There's a clear thesis statement. So have I proved that you're the most stupidest person ever?
This was written to this.
There's no more content than you are stupid.
A lot of these essays.
With an anecdote?
Anyway, here's another one. This was answering the question of student uniforms. So that was from the same. The tired student. Okay. Now this is what I call the crazy person essay, and we get these. And this is not a well-written essay, Fred.
It's not that well.
No. And it's not nice, but anyway, it makes everyone laugh. So.
I don't know if we're serious here, but the essay you showed just before about Clinton.
Oh, this one? Yeah.
Yes.
That's somebody wrote that.
I know, but is he trying to put you down, put the teacher down, or is he? Is this his best effort?
I don't think it's his. I think he either is insane or he's goofing around. I don't know.
He's goofing around.
Yeah.
I think it's insane.
I think this person has a problem. So I don't know. Then I got this essay, right? And it was half English. Really, okay, the first paragraph is really poorly written. And then I kind of speak Spanish and I can read okay, and I could not read this, so I sent it to my friend who lives in Mexico, and I said, is this person writing poorly in Spanish, or are they playing around with me? And her description of what she said it was about was, it's a rhyme about a drug runner, and the guy's basically saying he's the king of crystal meth wanted by the DEA and the Fed. So I think he can't write in English, and he just decides, forget it, whatever. It's just some rap, basically, that he heard somewhere, and he is repeating it. It happens to be from the north of Mexico, which is where she lives, so I hit gold when I asked her. Anyway, how do people score this stuff, you know? I mean, that's always the question. So what has happened historically, and what's still happening when there's no computer scoring intervention, is you have two human readers. They're not always women, but anyway, they are on this slide. So two human readers, if they agree exactly or within a point of each other, then the essay, they take an average of the score, they sum the score, they use those two scores to create the final score for the student. If there's a discrepancy greater than a point, so if I give a 4 and you give a 6, then it goes to a third person. So most people have heard of E-Rater and what we do at ETS, the automated essay scoring, but there is history, there is work in essay scoring and automated editing before E-Rater, and I just want to talk about that a little bit. So Ellis Page, he did work in the 1960s using transformation. He was an English teacher actually, and he did some work using transformation of essay length, and his papers are not really clear about what he does, but he did have a system, and he did do a lot of work that was published in the 60s and then the 70s again. Writer's Workbench was a tool that came out of research at Murray Hill at Bell Labs. And it was work done in the late 70s, early 80s. And it was an editing tool for students, and it did diction, style, and spelling, but it was Unix-based. And I think it did also do some discourse structure stuff, so it did topic sentence identification. I don't know how sophisticated the underneath part was, but it did do that. And I think teachers worked with it for a while, but it died out, I'm assuming because it was Unix-based and not everybody had a Unix system. And then Tom Landauer, who has knowledge analysis technologies, has Intelligent Essay Assessor, which is another essay scoring engine. And they do stuff completely differently than we do. They use latent semantic analysis for their, or I think they might call latent semantic indexing. So what basically happened is you had this body of work, you had people kind of playing around with these ideas, but there was no infrastructure, there was no PCs, there was no web, there was no way to sort of move it around and get people to use it. And now, I mean, I looked again the other day to see if NCES had any new statistics, but their last report is the 2002 one that I cite here. But basically you can see that, computer access and internet access, and because of that, there's been an increase in computer-based delivery for state assessments, and now we work with different states who are administering exams, and they have thousands and thousands of students, obviously. And the test publishers just have everything it's all digital textbooks at this point. So sort of like there was some work, but it was before its time. And now we have a lot of infrastructure and we can do something with it. So why would we want to is the question when everything seemed to be going along so well. Well, the first obvious thing is cost savings, because these assessments, these readers, and you need 2 to 3 readers, sometimes 4 in rare cases for essays in these organized scoring sessions. They make easily $25 to $30 an hour, and that was a few years ago. They do pretty well. And it became really expensive if you want to add what they call constructed responses on exams and take away the multiple choice. It becomes really expensive to score all this stuff. But if you have something like computer-based scoring, it gives you the opportunity to put those kinds of new questions on the tests.
I think that's an interesting perspective. So most people, when reacting to this, I think of it as, well, we're going to have the essay question, and the question is, does a computer score it, or does a computer score it? And you're saying that if the computer doesn't score it, there might not be an essay question at all.
Right.
And maybe that's worse than the fact that you lose a little bit of precision in the
There are many
scoring.
ways to look at that question, or answer that question. But yeah, that's one point of view. It's like, gee, if we could get rid of one of the humans, that's not a nice way to put it, but if we could replace one of the humans with a computer, so then your costs are reduced significantly, and maybe you can add another essay question or an essay question. But basically, the only high-stakes test at ETS that uses E-Rater or any automated scoring is GMAT. No other high-stakes test has agreed to use it. So I'll talk about, but they score a lot, thousands and thousands, and we scored over 1 million essays already with E-Rater. So you have this cost savings. You have a market now for practice assessments, because these, what they call authentic assessments, which are these writing assessments, they're becoming more prevalent on tests now, because that's what people want. They want to know about writing. They want short answer kinds of questions, which we're doing some work in also. And there's interest also for classroom instruction, because teachers, in most classrooms in this country, it's not unusual to find 25, 30 kids. I have a cousin who's a principal in elementary school who's had up to 40 kids in her classes, and you can't grade that much writing. It's just not possible to give students that much writing. So you could have some students, doing writing on the side, maybe some of the better students or some of the students who need more help, while you're doing something with other students in the classroom. So there was an interest in, using this for classroom instruction. So in terms of how do we think about this problem, because we're in this assessment industry, we want to do some NLP. They've asked me now to do automated essay scoring. What are some of their concerns that I need to think about as I'm developing this stuff? So first of all, can automated scoring introduce these high stakes assessments? And is it doing well enough, that I can do something with it? And in fact, is it really saving me that much money? Is it really worth it? So these are all kind of trade-offs that we have to look at. when we're developing the system. We have to make sure that all their concerns and all their interests sort of pan out in the end. Okay, so I'm given this problem of design an essay scoring system. So I said, well, what does an essay look like? So they said, look at the scoring guide. So these were these were the hints I had on how to score an essay. Besides, I had like 400 essays that had been scored. So what do you do with well-organized, with strong transitions, or develops arguments with specific, well-elaborated support, varied sentence structures? Like, what does that mean to the person who's scoring the test? Like, what is correlated with this stuff, you know? So, hi, David. He's sticking in the back. So what we did was we said, okay, we read through some essays and we said, what looks reasonable? What are we finding in the high-scoring essays, the mid-scoring essays, the low-scoring essays that we can capture with the kinds of NLP tools that we had 8 or 10 years ago when we first started working on this stuff? So for grammar errors and sentence structures, you know, we could look at part of speech. We had part of speech taggers and syntactic parsers, vocabulary usage. We had, you know, vector space analysis algorithms to work with, and part of speech taggers also. Sentence and word level mechanics, spelling tools, again, part of speech taggers. And organization development, we had some kinds of discourse analyzers or ways of getting at discourse. And so the first implementation of E-Rater lasted a really long time. It lasted from 1999, so I guess this month is the 6-year anniversary of E-Rater, scoring GMAT. And we just replaced it with a new system that I'll talk about a little later that we were able to develop over time. And so I'll just describe a little bit this system. So we started out, basically, we had Eric Brill's parser, which we enhanced a bit. So we had part of speech, I guess, part of speech tagger. Eric Brill's tagger and parser. Yeah, Abney's parser. And Eric, I've forgotten already whose was what, but we used, Abney's parser and Brill's tagger. His chunker, actually, was Abney's chunker. And we enhanced these things a bit, but it was all kind of free and available, and we could play with it and use it for our purposes. We implemented some TF-IDF stuff, and in terms of lexical complexity, we looked at word length, number of unique words, those kinds of features. And what we were given originally was just a couple of sets of essays, 2 different test questions, or what we call prompts. They were scored, and we split them up and we trained on one set to see what features were relevant, and then we cross-validated on another set using, and we built the models using originally stepwise linear regression, where we took a set of about 50 features related to, you know, that came out of these tools that we were able to produce. And the stepwise linear regression, what it does is it picks the most relevant features and it weights them for you, and you use those features for your model for that particular essay question. And that's how the first system worked, and it worked pretty well. How we measure performance, or how we were asked to measure performance using the system, is the same way that they use to measure human performance, which is how often do humans agree exactly and how often do they agree within a point of each other. And so it was basically, our E-Rater human agreement was basically comparable to agreement between 2 humans, which is 59% right on target and then about 98% within a point. And those numbers, sort of as we moved along and we got more data and more essay questions, they kind of stayed pretty stable, except what would really throw you off is if you had a set of data that wasn't scored very well. So it was badly annotated, because if you think of scored essay data, it's like annotated data. And if the annotators or the readers are not trained well, you're going to have a problem building your model. And that's what we found. And it didn't happen often, but it happened.
So I'm sorry, the issue is when a new annotator comes in?
No, it's just, sometimes if you get data from ETS that's been scored by ETS readers, they are so stringently watched and monitored, and they make sure that, you know, everybody's giving some of the score points. Because I explained earlier that what they started noticing, because the readers were getting paid much and they could get fired, is that they were noticing people were giving on a 6-point scale 2s and 5s, because they were more likely to be within a point of where they should be. And so then they really started monitoring them.
It never pays to pick a 6.
It never pays to pick a 6. And so basically they really started monitoring and saying, okay, I used to think this was a problem. They'd say, okay, you, Jason, you're a reader, you have to give a certain percentage of scores across the range. And I thought, well, what if you don't find them? But the fact is that the data are really well scored. And I appreciated how well scored they were when data came in from the outside. And some high school said, here's our data. And there was just no rhyme.
The teachers at the high school were doing this one?
Yeah, or I'm just using a loose example. Just some client that said, here's a bunch of our data. We've scored it on the 6-point scale using a holistic rubric, but there was no rhyme or reason to how it had been scored. There was no relationship between a 5 and a 3 or a 6. They looked alike if you actually went in and read them. Because when your models don't work, you go in and read the essays, what's going on here, So, so anyway, when E-Rater was done and baked and cooked, and we had, run it on, I guess, 20 or 30 different sets of essay questions, essay responses to that many questions, and we got approval from ETS and their statisticians and measurement people saying this looks equivalent to what people are doing. Let's do it. They were able to replace one of the people with E-Rater, with the computer. And E-Rater's monitored in the same way that people are. So I was explaining at lunch, there's like a data sheet that lists all the raters and how many, and there's rater E, rater comma E, and that's E-Rater, and what's going on with that. So I want to move through this a little bit. So, so you participated, Jason participated actually we had like an E-Rater challenge several years ago where, I don't know who they sent email out to, but I guess the linguistics community, and they said, see if you can beat E-Rater. And you won the prize.
Full E-Rater, I think is.
Mm-hmm.
We had to write the essay.
You had to write an essay. You had to guess what score you thought it was going to get by the way you wrote it. And I think you won the $250 prize.
I think I did, but I never sent in my social security.
So what happened was we put a demo out of E-Rater. It was one of the first demos, and we were just letting people try it. It was before we really had any real competitors, and there was really any big business. And people were just going crazy. And I mean, not the people we asked to, but just people from the outside. And so they had this real fear, what we call the New York Times headline phobia, which has happened even, recently. But this is kind of my made-up example of what their fear is, that you put in one of these stupid essays, and E-Rater gives it, a reasonable score. Which could happen because there's nothing wrong mechanically with this essay. It's not good.
Nothing wrong with it. What does that mean?
It means there's no spelling errors, there's no grammar errors. What?
I mean, you're so stupid is not wrong. What are you talking?
You are stupid is a complete, well-formed sentence.
Your is misspelled.
Which one?
Beginning of the second paragraph.
Oh, well, so that's like one error, but as opposed to, we get essays from some people that they're written with grammar errors, and they have like.
As somebody says you're instead of you are, he's a complete idiot.
I do that sometimes.
There's nothing to be discussed about. This is not a spelling error, or a typo.
It could be.
No.
It occurs twice.
This is a complete.
Yeah. Okay, he's not the best writer, but it could get it's not going to get a 6 like a high score, but it may get a 3. Because maybe the engine that they typed it into, maybe that model was built for 7th or 8th graders. So my point is this, it's not looking at the topic well enough. So you could write a really well-formed essay. This is, okay, let's not use this. Maybe this is a bad example of well-formed, but you can write a really well-formed essay on the wrong topic. You can write a beautiful essay about, your summer vacation, and but that's not what the topic is about. The topic is about something else, but you've fit every criteria that E-Rater is looking for. Does that work for you? Okay, so, and it could still give a good score. So we had an example recently where somebody said, it was an English teacher, he wrote an essay and he submitted it to Criterion, which is our system, and what he did was he replaced every relevant content word or the noun content word with the word chimpanzee. So but he got a high score because other than the fact that that word was wrong, everything else was this really nicely written 5-paragraph essay. So we had to find a way to deal with that. So it's not likely that you're going to be able to deal with it within the confines of E-Rater the way it's built, because it's looking like readers at everything. It's looking at the grammar, the mechanics, the discourse, and it's not giving you a score for each thing. It's giving you an overall score for your general quality of writing. Yeah.
So the error messages that you have on the screen at the moment suggest that you could use another strategy, which is E-Rater could sometimes punt it to a human rather than assign it a score.
But not in the classroom.
No.
So what happens when you have another person? So in GMAT, you have a person scoring, you have the computer scoring. The computer gives this essay a 5. The human says, this is a 0. This is off topic. Then it goes to somebody else. E-Rater missed that because they don't use any of our off-topic flagging devices for GMAT, but they have a person there, so they shouldn't need to, although it's happened when it's escaped the person because they're falling asleep or something. But it happens. I mean, or it's similar enough, but it's not really on topic, So what we did was we have these filters that Martin Chodorow built, and what it's statistical evaluation of word usage to get at the anomalous essays. And currently they require, you basically use the same set of essays that you used for training. And he uses, I'm not going to go into the method, it's written up because it'll take too long. But basically, he's pretty much able to, by comparing your new essay to other essays that have come in on that topic, and or the prompt, the essay question, he's able to say whether you wrote on the topic or not.
And if not, E-Rater doesn't look at it and it goes to you?
Well, they make different decisions about whether they want to not score it, and it's business decision basically, whether they want to put up both messages, like the score and the thing saying, we basically if you get a score in this, it's like saying it's not that confident about the score. Sometimes they decide, they make different decisions at different points in time. They decide maybe it's not such a good thing to put out the score if the thing is being flagged. So if the essay is being flagged. So, and you make adjustments based on what you find that the teachers or the users are finding most usable, So what happened was we had E-Rater running, and what we found is that teachers said, well, you know what? My 10th grader doesn't know what, when he or she gets a 3 on an essay, and then what happened first is they get a score, and they would just get the section of the scoring guide back explaining what the 3 meant. And that meant nothing to, middle school, elementary school, middle school. Even, a lot of community colleges started using it. They were some of the first users. And they said, this doesn't mean anything. So what we ended up doing was getting together a bunch of focus groups with teachers and policymakers and all kinds of content and assessment experts and saying, well, what is it that you want? What is it that will be helpful? And this is in terms of not a GMAT kind of thing where you just really want a score, but in terms of usage in the classroom, So some other, you have more innovation, you have more questions, more criteria of the users that you have to meet. So if we're going to produce feedback, how meaningful is it? Is it actually improving what the students are doing or not? I mean, they could be practicing and getting feedback, but how are they doing long term? Is it doing anything for them? And can instructional software help students understand and evaluate their own writing and get better? So how is all our technology and all the stuff that we're going to build, how's it going to help them be meaningful? So I guess it was in 2000 or 2001, I don't even remember the exact year, but they came out with this, we came out with a product called Criterion, which is the one I was going to demo. It is a product, it is in the field, and I'll show you some numbers later about how many people are using it. And it has 2 components. It has E-Rater in its current form, and it has the critique writing analysis tools, and that is the feedback component that flags grammar errors, usage errors, mechanics errors. It gives some style advice, not a whole lot, and it gives you information about your organization and development from an essay-based kind of organization and development. And so in terms of building the system, why did we build all this stuff from scratch? Because basically, The only thing that was free when we started building this stuff was spelling. I mean, you get Unix spell. That was all that was free. The other stuff, other people were doing it. I mean, Microsoft has done a lot of work in, grammar error finding and style advice, but they weren't giving us their software or licensing it to us. So, and then there was nothing in terms of organization development that was usable, that was understandable to students. So that we definitely were going to have to build ourselves. So I just want to talk about a little bit, really briefly, about some of the underlying methodology, some of the NLP that we use to develop this stuff. And so the grammar usage and mechanics errors were developed by Claudia Leacock and Martin Chotter. Now, Martin is a consultant with us, but he's at Hunter College. Claudia worked at ETS until last year, and then she's now working for Tom Landauer's group, the KAT, so she went to work for the competitor. But just to acknowledge that she was part of all of this before she left, and she was part of E-Rater and everything. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about their work here and how they use this sort of one method to get at a lot of information about grammar usage and mechanics errors. So what they found is that using a corpus of well-formed text, 30 million words from newspapers, kind of standard stuff, and using function words and part of speech tags as features, they collected frequencies for unigrams and for bigrams. And using point-wise mutual information and log likelihood ratios, they looked for unexpected sequences or violations in grammar, and they found that these were really highly correlated with score, first of all, and they were highly correlated with different kinds of errors that they wanted to look for or wanted to find. Some of this stuff fell out really easily once they figured out this method. And so they were harvesting, they say, the low probability bigrams from a set of essays. We always have a gold mine of essays to work with. Not always annotated, but we always have lots of stuff where we can poke around and work with. And so here are some examples of the low probability bigrams, like these pencil every teenagers. And there are the bigrams, the syntactic bigrams that they were related to. So you didn't have to do it on a word basis. You could do it more broadly using these part of speech tag bigrams. And then, of course, they would always point out, or Claudia would point out, that
This pencil is a lexical bigram, right?
no, it's the product of the determiner noun. So the plural determiner. Yeah, so just using a tag.
But how do you, every is 80 is what?
It stands for, it's in there, a set of tags. I don't know exactly what it stands for, but it's article, but it's some kind of
But
special.
exactly, so some teenagers would be all right?
Some teenagers would be all right, but
And it would still be 80. And
I don't know that.
No, it would be a different tag.
Some might be a different tag than every. I'm not exactly sure what all the tags are. I'm learning because I'm starting to take over some of this, but I don't know. You would know maybe better what the tags are. Anyway, what Claudia always pointed out is that you could work to a certain extent with these bigrams, but also you needed to write some filters because these pencil is yellow is bad, but these pencil erasers are dirty is fine. So you had to be careful about these kinds of instances. And when people are using the system, I mean, you go for precision over recall. You don't want to report errors that aren't really there. But when you miss errors, they complain. So you have to be really careful.
Do you have annotated data to test these yet?
Sometimes.
So you have a corpus of ungrammatical sentences written by real writers?
Yeah. Well, it's not, I don't know how well organized it is, but we have lots. We do have here and there, we have lots of essay data, and so we extract stuff as we need it. But I know they had, I don't know exactly what they worked with, but I know they had lots of data to work from with lots of ungrammatical sentences, which are not that hard to come by.
Which have been tagged by humans as ungrammatical.
No, not necessarily.
Right, well, I mean, you would, to be fully annotated, wouldn't just be ungrammatical sentences, but you'd want these particular errors.
Well, what I think what they tended to do is they couldn't really ever measure recall because they didn't have tag data. Because to go through the data and find enough sentences with subject-verb agreement errors would be going through a lot of data. So what they would do is they would run their system on lots and lots of data, and then they would see what their precision was, like what the system picked that then
Validate only the results.
yeah.
Right, track style recall.
So anyway, so let me just go through quickly. I'm listing all the kinds of what they categorize as grammar errors here, but in the pink is what their method was able to capture, these different kinds of errors under grammar. And then the way grammar usage and mechanics, the way it was divided was done by the content experts at ETS. So some of what we might consider grammar errors, they would consider usage errors. This is the kind of stuff that they're able to get at using those methods. And mechanics, a lot of the mechanics is trivial, like you don't have a question mark at the end of the sentence, but some of it missing apostrophe and hyphens and duplicate words. That stuff was picked up nicely by their bigram method. So I'll go over quickly. I don't know how, this is maybe the least interesting of the work I've done, but it was interesting to the teachers, which is that in terms of style, we didn't have anything. And some things that they wanted, they said, well, just tell the students how many really short sentences they have, how many unusually long sentences they have, because you don't want it to go too much in either direction, and how many passives. That stuff is fairly trivial. But the other thing that they said that we thought was going to be trivial, but it wasn't, they said it's really annoying when students repeat the same word or phrase over and over and over again. And it came up with this essay that was written to an essay question about community service. And the student wrote a really good essay, but they repeated the term community service like at the beginning of, or end of every sentence. And it degrades the quality of the essay overall, and it made the teacher want to give a lower score, you know. So we thought this was going to be pretty easy, but it wasn't. It wasn't a matter of just using the percentage of time the word was used in the essay, or you know how often it was used in a paragraph. It required doing some machine, you know, finding features that were relevant based on an annotated set of data, where we set a couple of teachers loose on essays and said, tell us, we didn't know really how to ask them what to do, but if the word is annoying to you, if it's repeated so much time that it's interfering with the fluency of the essay, mark it as overly repetitive. You know, when we did that, they didn't agree very much, but they each had their own pattern of what was annoying. So I could model for each of them and get really great agreement on either one of them. So we chose in the end, you know, we found a bunch of features that were useful: proportion of word and essay, distance between the repeated word, whether it's a pronoun or not, word length. And we use C5O to model one of their patterns, and we get pretty decent results in terms of labeling these annoyingly repetitive words. So in terms of organization development, yeah, there's a lot out there. There's I could use Daniel Marcoux's RST trees, and we originally used, you know, keyword and term detection. You could use, you know, kind of text tiling approaches to get it at coherence, or, you know, this lexical chains, but none of that stuff is meaningful to students, and it's not telling them so much about the organization of their essay that the teacher's looking for. So I worked with Daniel Marcoux and Kevin Knight, and we built together a system. We actually put together two systems that they built that were probabilistic, with a system that we built at ETS, and we now have a voting system. But we basically went through and annotate. We had annotators, two annotators go through about 1,400 essays and annotate them for these categories. The thesis statement, main points, supporting ideas, conclusion statement, and background. And based on this annotated data, we were able to use different kinds of features. I built a decision-based model. They built two probabilistic models, and we had this voting system. And it works reasonably well. Yes, it's largely based on, I mean, position contributes a lot, at least. I don't know what's going on so much in their system because they use more language modeling approach. But this is all documented in an article that appeared in one of the IEEE special issues of, I forget, Intelligent Systems. So all this stuff is on a website, which I can give you access to, and you can find all this stuff published. So we have grammar usage, mechanics, and style, and we have the organization development. So in terms of evaluations, well, what are we doing exactly? So We look at precision recall and F measure. That's not what they look at ETS, but we try and present it to them and explain it to them as something which is important way to look at things. And again, the trade-off is precision for recall because it's better not to show the falsely identified errors. You really don't want that. People get more angry when you show them that than when you just miss something. But lately they're starting to get angry about the stuff that we miss. So anyway, that's the way it is. So for grammar, usage, and mechanics, the bigram methods, what Claudia and Martin did was they set a level of precision. I think it was 90%. It had to be 0.90. And if it wasn't working, if it was working below that for a particular error, then they wouldn't use it. Otherwise, it was fine. And for us, with the style and organization development, we had human annotated data. So we just developed baselines, and we used the typical precision recall and F measures to make sure it outperformed the baselines and was reasonably, within the range of human performance. Okay, so here are just some numbers to give you an idea of how well we're doing. So yes, the bigram stuff, they always set precision at 90. Big picture of the discourse capability, not breaking it down by discourse element, we got about 85% overall precision, which is, nicely, it's closer to human agreement than it is to the baseline. And the baseline's high because position gives you a lot, just like length gives you a lot for essay score. It's sort of a correlate for discourse because people write very formulaically.
So I'm having trouble understanding the last numbers. It says human agreement is 55%, but the system precision.
Yeah, because I had to model, when I modeled each human independently, I got really, really good precision. But we could not get them to agree. They just didn't agree. They agreed on a subset, like the really, really, really bad ones where people were just repeating like enormously that would probably be obvious to anybody. But then they had their own little personal bias. So for one person, it didn't take much for the person to seem to be repeating themselves, and for the other person, it took more. And that was their agreement. And yeah.
So when you measure repetitive word use, you're just saying, take an essay and decide whether it has a repetitive word usage problem or not.
Yeah.
So it's not find me the location of a repeated use, which is not.
No, what it does is when it thinks that you've overused a word, it highlights that word on the screen for you. It's not an error, so it's not so egregious. It's just saying, you might have used this word too much. Think about it.
But the point is that the decision isn't independent for each one of those repetitions. This is the binary decision at the essay level.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what about, I don't understand how the discourse capability is evaluated. Is that also binary? That this essay is
No, what happens is there are 5 background, thesis, main points, support, conclusion, and then we have other. We had 6 categories of discourse, and other was like titles and bullet points, things that we really didn't want to that we show the student, but they're not really part of a persuasive essay discourse structure. And so what that shows is how well the system labeled all kinds of discourse.
Each paragraph has one of these labels roughly?
Or more. It has more. It usually has 2 labels because usually they have background and thesis, and then there's main point and support, and yeah.
I have no idea how you could, what features are indicative of good development of an argument.
We're not rating if it's good or bad. We're just telling you if it's there or not.
What is it? What is
So if it exists. So in other words,
it
is a discourse element. So in other words, you can have an essay, and we'll label all that we find. So we say, here's your thesis statement, here's your 2 main points, your supporting ideas, but you don't have a conclusion. Where's your conclusion? We're not saying, here's your thesis, the next step and what we're moving on to and what we've already moved on to is...
How do you know that, I'm sorry, how do you know that this sentence is a supporting sentence
Well,
to thesis? Thesis maybe is a form of the sentence, so maybe you can tell that.
a thesis...
What feature would tell you that...
A thesis statement is typically in the first paragraph. It typically contains a certain kind of words.
Yes, I understand.
It's not, yeah. So
I have
there's
no problem with that.
Okay.
I have a problem with the support statement.
supporting ideas typically follow the main point. So I say, I've already said, I've already repeated the prompt, which is what they do a lot, and that's my background information. You know, some people think that school uniforms are bad.
Yes.
I think that school uniforms are good. There's my background and thesis.
Well,
Then
of
you-
course, if you say the words, there is my background thesis.
No, I'm saying it to you. I'm saying I'm highlighting it to you. So I'm rating this essay. Uniforms. You know, some people think uniforms are bad. I think they're good. So let's say the system goes and says background thesis, right?
Right.
Then the student's going to say something like, I think that they're good because of this reason. That's your main idea.
Yes.
Now, following that is usually, you hope, something that says, that elaborates on the main idea of that paragraph.
And you would have to have some agreement between the words of the thesis and this. I mean, what if the next sentence is, Mondays are always a happy day?
This is the next phase. We're not judging the goodness or badness of the organizational element. What we're saying is that we're expecting to find in an essay that it has a thesis statement, 3 main points, 3 supporting ideas with each main point, so elaborating on the main point and a
I
conclusion.
understood that.
Okay, so I'm
But
just
how
trying
do
to.
we know that
The
that
system,
the thing is relevant?
we don't.
So
It's-
the stylistic point of the support statement
Uh-huh.
is stylistically, I don't know, usual, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
But whether the content of it corresponds to the thesis, you don't even judge. Is this correct?
Not in the current system.
Yes.
All it's doing right now is saying you have it or you don't. That's all it's saying. But it's not judging the quality of it. That's what we gave a talk on that at NACL 2, and it's in here, and I'm going to talk about it briefly, but we haven't been able to put it into the system yet.
But you
that
know
would,
how to put it in the system.
I think I
Are you
do.
going to tell us?
It's a whole big paper, but I can basically, I can go over it a little bit if we have time.
Well,
I have-
let me
yeah, we have a paper, and I can point you
let me
to it.
ask you,
Yeah.
just to clarify the question.
Okay.
So I can give you 2 lines where the first one goes, there was a problem on the space station.
Mm-hmm.
The astronauts were running out of food.
Okay.
And another one, there was a problem on the space station. The astronauts were celebrating Christmas.
And it would probably say that you had a thesis and you had a main point and they were the same. That's probably what would happen if they're
No, I'm
two
saying
different.
In the second case,
Yeah,
it's not at all obvious that this is supporting the whatever.
because this
It is
system, this system is not looking at the coherence of the elements and how they relate to each other. And that's a very good point. It's a valid point, and I wish they would let me put it into the system. But so far, all I've been able to get is for them to put this into the system, you know, as it is.
But is
You
the
know.
point here that you don't have to have it there because people, quote, are trying, and they usually succeed in that aspect of it if they succeed in the formal.
Why don't we have that in there, the quality
No, I'm
stuff?
saying,
Or-
is that the idea that in fact if they succeed
Uh-huh.
in having it formally like a support statement, then they probably have put the content in as well.
It's
and
not-
therefore we don't have to
No,
check for it.
it's just implementation issues. We got funding to do the first part, which was to be able to identify, and now we got funding to look at actually the quality of the stuff. And where this has come in handy, okay, where this works is that now, and I'll talk about it in a minute, is E-Rater 2.0. So let me tell you how some of this has worked for us, besides the fact that it may not be complete, and it may not tell you like everything about your essay and everything you want to know, but we've sort of come a long way from just a score, okay? So let me just show you how this is, yeah, did you want to have a burning question?
So how would you fail the support part? How would you not?
You not get support, basically, if you, let's say you had one sentence, you had a first paragraph, and then you had 3 individual sentences, or 2 individual sentences that were all new paragraphs. Typically what happens is somebody writes a paragraph, it's their thesis and background. Then they write one sentence, and then they write another sentence, and then they're done. it may show that you have a main point because you've written one kind of topic sentence, but then it'll say, so you just have a main point, you really should elaborate on this. It can do that kind of fairly trivial direction when stuff is missing, but it's not going to tell you anything more than that at this point. However, let me tell you how helpful all this stuff has been for developing the next version of E-Rater. And I think all this stuff is also helpful for students when they're revising their essays, because if they see they haven't written enough, they become more productive. And they start to write more to get better scores. Apparently it becomes a game for some of the kids. So it's like, gee, I only got a 4. What do I have to do to get a 5? And they practice, practice, practice. But anyway.
So they do eventually, right. You're helping them game the system. That's the problem with releasing the software.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, I mean, no, and not all of them. It's just some of the anecdotal feedback that people have given us that they say, the students really like this because they treat it like a video game and it makes them write more. It makes
That's
them...
true. The question is whether they learn whether the stuff that they learn, whether it's easier to learn how to write better or easier to learn how to fool the system.
Well, I'll talk about that a little because we did some validity studies.
Yeah.
So, but I don't have a lot of time, so let me get...
Well, we started late. You should get to go late.
I am going late.
Well, she's way over time already, but because we started late,
Now I'm
she's got more time.
So, anyway.
We always ask about it.
So E-Rater now has 12 features. That's all we use. They're basically, they are relevant now to what is being given back as feedback and criterion. So before, the E-Rater score and the feedback they were getting in that system, it was a disconnect and it was a problem. Now that we have grammar errors and the style advice and the organization development, we're actually able to include all of that stuff. And we include it in every model. We force it in the same features with multiple regression. And what we collect is all the information about the error types, all the information about the style that we get, all the information, and it's not directly like counts of, we do some transformations, but it tells us how much elaboration they've done in their essay. It tells us how many pieces of the essay they have compared to how many we expect them to have, And then we also look at vocabulary, not much differently than we did before, a little bit. And we get a little bit better agreement, and we have the standardized set, and another thing that we could do is we could adjust, not the parameter estimates, the weights that come out of the regression, but we can adjust how strong you want any particular feature to be. And organization development, this comes out to be the most correlated, or one of the most correlated features with human score. So when they're reading the essay, they're looking for, if they have a thesis statement, it's easier to follow an essay that is lined up really nicely with all the bits than one that is scattered all over the place or one giant paragraph where they don't, So we find that it's been really useful, and it's also helped to pick up the exact agreement. There's not a whole lot of room for the exact plus adjacent, but we went up a few % with exact agreement, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's really a lot. It was really hard. It took years and years and years to...
This high correlation is not with the manually annotated existence of these, but in fact with the automatically detected existence of main argument.
Yes.
In other words, if the system thinks it's missing a supporting statement,
yes,
regardless of whether it is or isn't,
you're right.
The human assessor thinks it's a bad essay. This would be much better than saying...
I guess what is happening here is that whatever the system is producing, because we're getting it at this point all out of criterion, whatever the system is producing is correlating well with the human reader score. So, and we're getting nice results from it. And all of this stuff has enabled us, and we're going to add this, it's going to come in March, for what we call the E-Rater trait-based scoring, or levels. So they're going to get their score, and they're going to get not a score for grammar, usage, mechanics, style, for each of those traits, organization, development, but they're going to get a ranking that says your grammar is expected or lower or higher than expected based on your holistic score. Your organization development is, let's say you get a 5, but your organization development wasn't the thing really that pushed it up there. Maybe you want to take a look at that. It's a little lower. Everything else looks good and is contributing to the 5, but maybe you would have gotten a 6 if you had worked on the organization development a little more. So we have something right now in there that just picks up, but Tom Morton did that, based on rare part of speech tag sequences. From, people who really goof around and mix up the content, or this banging on the keyboard kind of essay that we get. It's another one of the filters. Now, let me go through some of the validity stuff, and then we can come back and the effectiveness studies. So my colleague Yigal Tali, who's a psychologist and a measurement guy, and who's helped a lot with E-Rater, and he developed the trait scoring. And he actually sat down and learned a lot about linguistics before he built anything, which was unusual and nice. But he and another colleague of mine, I have another study in here, wanted to know, okay, we have all this stuff, how is it helping? And so what Yigal did, and I explained to someone earlier, is that we save in Criterion the first and the last submission that the student has. So that's what he had to work with. He has the first and the last submission. He knows how many submissions they've submitted, but we don't save all of them for prehistoric disk space reasons. And so what he found is that he only worked with students who had written more than once, had actually done a revision. And he had like 8,000 essays that he worked with. And he found that, 25% error reduction across the 30 plus error types that we have. So they were making fewer errors and they were writing more. So you can't argue with that. Okay, they're lowering the number of errors that they, well, you can, but there are fewer errors and they're writing more. There's more, they're writing more in these categories. Another colleague of mine around the same time, and now they work together, he's at Florida International University. He did a study totally independently, and he used data from 10th graders in Florida. It was a controlled study. Some were using Criterion, some weren't. He was looking at two things. He wanted to know if traditional instruction versus the ability to use Criterion would A, improve their FCAT score, which is a standardized test that Florida gives. And he wanted to know also, in general, is it just helping their writing? And without going into the details of the study, the bad news, as he reports, was that he didn't find any differences in their FCAT scores. They worked the whole year. But he has to look into that. But he found the same thing that Yigal found, which is that over time, and he had a bigger portfolio of essays to work with. So if Yigal had 2 essays, he might have had 5 or 6 or 7 essays that they had written over a period of time. He found that there was a reduction in their errors and that their productivity was increased. So 2 different studies, and they're getting similar results.
Sorry, what was the control group?
The control...
What was there a control group that had to do as much writing as the students who used these but didn't get any feedback from? The control group was just the regular classroom, and they were supposed to be doing the same number of assignments, but the ones who had access to Criterion, in theory, were doing more writing, and they were getting feedback. Right, the question is, was it just the more writing or was the feedback helpful? The feedback might cause them to do more writing, so it's
I'm not exactly sure. That is not, I don't remember exactly that detail. So, I didn't participate very much in this study. I got the results, but yeah. So here's just some quick information about how many people, how much E-Rater is scoring, sort of what the increase in users has been over time, and where it's being used. I'll quickly do 2 things. Let me just show you some of the screenshots quickly. We can go through them kind of fast, just to give you an idea, since I can't do the demo. So I was able to make this thing bigger, but I wasn't able to make anything else bigger. But basically what this is showing is this is a screen dump from real, I put in the "You Are So Stupid" essay, and it found a subject-verb agreement error. So once a teacher give you, then it gives you feedback, subject and verb may not agree. Moving on to the usage screen, it found the YOUR, and that's also work that Claudia did. And here, the repetition, it's saying it doesn't like, it works with morphology a little bit. So if it found stupid, it's going to find stupidest and say, you've got stupid going on here a little too much. Is there too much? And it's not an error, it's just saying, take a look, And then there's the thesis statement. So you are stupid because you can't read, and you're stupid because you can't speak English, and blah, blah, blah. So
Looks like elaboration.
it's, yeah. So, I mean, one of the benefits of this is that it does give students independence, and it gives the teacher some independence too. So while they're doing one thing, someone else could be, you know, working with this in the classroom. So I'll quickly also just go through, so what we're doing besides essay evaluation. So another one of Claudia's big projects, which has now been passed on to Tom Morton, is C-Rater, which is short answer, concept-based essay evaluation. And the big difference between this and E-Rater is that this is looking for correct answers. So with E-Rater, you can write basically about, you can write in any direction about the topic. It's not looking for the right or wrong answer about whether school uniforms are good or not. It's just looking for a well-written essay, and it's judging the quality of writing. The short answer scoring, this is usually has to do with a particular subject. So it's a science test or something, and they're looking for particular kinds of answers, like correct answers or not correct answers. And they have a lot of trouble getting data that's really well scored because, and there's a lot of there are issues with paraphrase here. Because students, it's unbelievable how many ways they can answer something that you think would be really concrete. That's what Claudia has talked to me about over time. So just a big picture of some other things going on at ETS. They do some work in another group. Derek Higgins is one of my colleagues there, and they do some work with automatically generating items because it's kind of hard it takes a lot of time to go through and make stuff up by yourself or look through books or, you know, just come up with this stuff from scratch. And so he has a way that's using sentence pattern information, and they have this big article database. And so when they have these patterns of sentences, you know what it should look like when it becomes an item, they can do these regular expression searches through the article database, and they come up with automatically generated items. And I think they're actually starting to use it soon to see how well it works in the test development part of ETS. And they're working in English and Spanish right now. And I think he's doing also some work with Japanese, but I'm not really exactly sure how much. Paul Dean is another computational linguist who's at ETS, and he's doing something also with item generation, and it has to do with, for sentence completion, multiple choice items, generating the right words. Generating candidate vocabulary using word meaning approaches, and also generating the keys and the distractors that would go along with the items. And apparently this is something that'll be really useful for the test developers. And then, so some current research problems. We need to have more grammar errors that cater more to non-native speakers, because those are the kinds of errors that it's not picking up, and that seems to be something people are complaining about. The coherence work in organization development, we've done a significant amount, but we need to do some more and see if they're willing to include it in the application. And then we're doing some enhancements of off-topic essay detection, because what they've now introduced into Criterion, or they've had it for a while, is that instructors can write their own topics. And we don't have any scored data to use our current methods to find out if the essay is written to the topic or not, and that's something that they want to include. So that's something that I'm looking into with Derek Higgins. And we're also doing, there's sort of a push for NLP-based innovative English language learning applications. So that's another direction that we're going. And there's lots of publications, and Tom Morton has a freeware parser that's apparently pretty good, that's available in SourceForge, just so you know. And that's it. And I think I'm not too far off of my time, given how late we started. So thank you very much.
I have a question. These things work on the basis of correlation, right? Essentially, of the judgment of the software with the judgment of the
people. Right.
Now, ETS is always in trouble with that, because whenever somebody says, I'll give you an example which is not a real example, 2 and 2 is 7, and there is an answer 2 and 2 is 4, but they mark 2 and 2 is 7 correct. There is always trouble on that. even though it may be that the guy who says 2 and 2 is 4 lacks imagination, therefore we don't want to employ him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, won't there be attacks of this sort on a system here also?
Every day there are attacks on the system. Every day I have to deal with, there's the attack from English teachers, which I hear less and less. They usually come from rhetoric departments where people are doing creative writing, and it doesn't apply here. There are lots of, the kinds of complaints that I get mostly, or the kinds of stuff that comes up in the newspaper is you get journalists who often just want to talk about how it's really bad.
Yes.
Or if they think they want to give a balanced approach, they say it's okay and here's what they do and blah blah blah, and then they give some really horrible example of like the chimpanzee essay, and they put no context around it. You don't really know what they were doing.
I was even thinking of these, true or false, not true or false, 4 choices where something is scored as correct, one choice, but some other.
Yeah.
Somebody has complained that some other answer under some interpretation.
I don't know how much of that they get. I don't know how much of that they actually. That may happen. I don't hear about it though. I don't hear about it.
It's in the New York Times always.
There are times when.
Your software. I'm talking about.
No, I know. There are times when ETS misscores a whole batch of data, or they lose a batch of data, and it really makes the news because a lot of that has to do with high stakes testing. It has to do with an SAT or Praxis or something where it's really affecting somebody's life. So, but they're an institution that gets a lot of complaints. That's for sure. So, and I certainly do. I have to deal with complaints from users all the time. They're not nasty or anything. It's just like, why didn't this work? Why didn't it pick up this comment error? And I have to come up with an answer. And sometimes I have one, and sometimes I don't. So, anyway, any more questions? No. Thank you.
No,